Welcome to This is Horror. I'm your guest host, Dan Howarth, and tonight I'm joined with the usual co-host, Bob Pastorella, and special guest host, David Moody. And tonight we're interviewing the usual host of This is Horror, Michael David Wilson, about his upcoming re-release and reissue of The Girl in the Video, his fantastic horror novella. And we're going to dig deep beneath the skin of this fucked up Gaijin J-Horror novella. And we're going to dig deep into the horror that is Michael David Wilson. Okay, so Michael, I'm aware that you often open this podcast by asking your guests what was their first experience with story. I'm going to flip this on its head and ask you, what was your first experience with this story?
What was my first experience with this story? Well, that would be Max Booth and Laurie Michelle inviting me to submit a story for, I believe it was one of the Lost anthologies. I think it was Lost. Yeah, it must have been Lost Films, because the idea was that the story that they wanted, it could be anything within video horror or where technology is being used for, I suppose, something foreboding and uneasy and spectral. So it was, much like a lot of these anthology calls, you could really interpret the theme as broadly as possible, as long as it was video or media horror. And so when I got the invite to the anthology, and being a fan of the previous anthology they'd put out, Lost Signals, and being a fan of Max Booth and everything that was going on at Perpetual Motion Machine Publishing, now Ghoulish Books, I thought, let's submit a story. And so much like Stephen Graham Jones, when he gets a call to an anthology, the first thing I did was actually come up with a list of things that I didn't want to include, and that I thought, okay, this is all a bit too cliche. And then came up with another list. Okay, what could I include? And I thought, well, living in Japan, setting it in Japan was a great starting point. And I wanted the protagonist to receive these disquieting but slightly alluring anonymous videos. And that was the starting point. That was the impetus. And as I was planning and then subsequently writing it, I realized that this was going to be a lot longer than the 5,000 word limit for this anthology call. And so I spoke with Max and was asking, well, how long can this be? And I kept checking in with Max, and as it got longer and longer, and in the end, she just said, why don't you submit it as a novella? Why don't you submit it to Perpetual Motion Machine Publishing's novella line? I don't know if that was because Max thought it was, a good idea, or if she just wanted me to stop pestering her about the word count and how much I could get away with. And so that is my first experience with The Girl in the Video. So it went from short story to novelette to novella to now second edition novella with a potential film in the works. So not a bad journey, really, for something that came as a result of an email asking if I'd like to submit a story to Lost Films.
So, Michael, that was your first bit of Japan set horror. And pretty much everything you've done after that has been back in the UK again. So what was it about that story? Was it anything to do with you having, I don't know how long you'd been in the country when you wrote it?
Well, I mean, I would say at the moment that I'm alternating between writing things in Japan and in the UK more often than not, specifically in the Midlands, more often than not, specifically in Kidderminster.
Kidderminster.
But, yeah. But for that particular story, how long had I been in Japan? So it came out in 2020, but I think it was 2018 that I submitted it. So then I must have written it around 2017, which shows you just how long these publishing cycles can be. So then that would mean that I had been in Japan for like about 2 years at that point. And I just think that the isolation that you have in Japan and the like as a gaijin in Japan, the potential for that, and being a literal foreigner by nature, and the isolation and anxiety that you can feel if you're getting these anonymous and these creepy videos, and these videos that are clearly personalized just for you, they're a perfect marriage. So it was never going to be set in Kidderminster or anywhere else. It just felt like it was the perfect complement to the story. So the location is as much a character as any of the characters. And so, I've said that there's a potential film in the works. I've spoke a little bit about that in the afterword as well. But one thing that I think is important for the film, if at all possible, obviously there are a lot of moving pieces, there are a lot of other people involved, but I think it's keeping that setting to Japan. Because I think if you take the girl in the video out of Japan, you do lose a lot of that atmosphere and a lot of what it is that creates the fear and creates the unease.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that I kind of wanted to ask you, and I've got to be honest, like we've known each other a very long time, Michael. It's something I feel like I've kind of neglected to ask you, but you know, you'd lived in the country 2 years at that point. What were your early days like in Japan, and how do you think they informed your writing? You've talked about kind of isolation, the culture shock, I guess, from moving from Britain as a Western facing country to Japan. You know, can you tell us how that experience as an outsider almost, I guess, has informed your writing? Because it is infused not only through this book, but through every other book, I would say, even the ones that are set in Britain. It's clear that your perspective on the world has grown further than it had when you were just living in the UK.
So this is one of these questions where the person being interviewed, they say, wow, that was a fascinating question that I've never been asked before. And the reason that they're doing that is they're actually stalling for time and trying to simultaneously think of the best way to answer the question. As someone who has interviewed a number of people, I know what's going on there. And there's so many pieces to what you're asking, because goodness, it's like, do I talk about the writing? Do I talk about specifically my first impression of Japan? And then molding them or melding them together is, yeah, that is a beast in and of itself. Because I think my writing really kicked off in a big way after the one story per week challenge that we did, Dan, for a year. And that was in 2016. But the first time that I went to Japan was in 2014. Now, some people are saying, hang on a minute, you said you wrote this in 2017 and it was 2 years, and that's 3 years. Well, the thing is that I've lived in Japan on 3 different occasions. So there was a year in Portugal in between. And so when I first came to Japan, I did it because I wanted to get out of the UK and I wanted to experience another part of the world. I wanted to experience another culture. And so, goodness, when I came to Japan, it's like being almost overwhelmed with sensory input. You've got the bright lights, you've got the language which I didn't really speak or couldn't really read at the time. And even train stations and supermarkets have their own unique theme tune and jingle, and everything felt a little bit like being in a video game, probably because, companies like Sega and Nintendo and Sony, they are from Japan. So, I'm sure that has a lot to do with it. But it was a wonderful experience, and it was overwhelming at the same time, but almost in a glorious way. So that was 2014. But I suppose as you live there for longer, then you do realize, like, how isolating it can be, or how much potential there is for isolation. And not only is there a different language, but there are three different alphabets, one of them being the kanji character system. Or there's what, over 10,000 kanji, but there's only about 2,000 that are in popular use. So that means that if you see a really obscure kanji and you could ask a Japanese person, what does that one mean? Don't know. Well, what chance do I have if they don't know? They've been living here 20 or 30 years. So I think that there was so much potential, again, to kind of almost repeat from the last question, to just go into the isolation and the disconnect. But in terms of how it's informed my writing, I suppose because I was doing the one story per week challenge in 2016, and I was in Japan at the time, I haven't really not been writing. I haven't really been writing really seriously and not living in Japan. So it's a little bit difficult for me to separate the two. I remember that, well, whilst I did a degree in English and creative writing, and you and me, Dan, I think we've had similar journeys in the sense that since we've known each other, which I think was in 2010 or 2011, we have both been writing, but for the first 5 or 6 years, it was almost, we will write when we have the time. Well, if you say that, then there is no fucking time. You make the time, you make the habit, you cultivate that. So, of course, I'd written stories before, but rather than it just being living in Japan, I think it was making a deliberate practice out of writing stories that led me to do this with some seriousness. Talking about things that are overwhelming, your question is overwhelming, Dan, because this 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 is what I'm getting a taste of my own medicine. This is what I fucking do to people. I throw something out so vague, or sometimes I make a statement and hope that they'll answer it. There is no answer to be given, but I can see that Bob has something to say, so let's see if I fare any better from that.
Well, it seems like that. I mean, as a writer myself, I mean, we tend to gravitate towards the things that we become obsessed with, and change and uncertainty within change is something that I think that a lot of writers can use that to tap into and discover different stories. And so I think that whenever you're kind of like me, when you find a new thing for you moving to Japan, it opened it did, while the actual move itself may have presented some problems, it opened the door to creativity. And being that you were, writing and doing the story all the time, it allowed you to kind of indulge in other, in some of your other, I guess, preoccupations. You tend to write about characters that are fish out of water. You tend to write about people going through, tremendous change in their life. You have this thing with women named Yuki, but you know, talking about they're watching, but you know, the the concept of write what you know, you do it. It's not like, write what you know. It's like, well, I know my job. No, no, no. It's about using your life. And I think that you use that to the best of your abilities, and it's proven to be very, very, very successful for you. So
Well,
I mean, it's not really a question. It's just a comment. It's just, a general observation that I've seen in your work.
yeah, well, I think you did a better job of answering the question that Dan put to me than I did. So I'll just field them to you in the future. But I mean, as well, like, I think, being a horror writer living in Japan, there aren't that many of us about. So I almost felt that it would be a tremendous missed opportunity to not be setting horror in Japan, which kind of goes back to what Dave was saying before about, look, I wrote the girl in the video, and then I proceeded to release They're Watching, which is set in England, House of Bad Memories, which is set in England, Kidderminster, and Daddy's Boy, also Kidderminster. And I've got another one that I'm working on at the moment, What Would Wesley Do? Kidderminster. So it's the Kidderminster trilogy. We had the Cornetto trilogy. Now we've got the Kidderminster trilogy, the most underwhelming success.
Certainly not as tasty.
Yeah. yeah. You don't want to put that in your mouth, believe you me. But I think because quite a few of my short stories were then set in Japan. So, like I said, where the girl in the video, it had to be in Japan. I think what I've done is I've essentially written the stories that I've wanted to write and that have arrived to me. But I have felt recently, going back to the girl in the video in Japan, and specifically Gaijin J-Horror, that if I'm not tapping into that, then what am I doing? So it's difficult because I do have Kidderminster-based stories that turn up. And if a Kidderminster-based story turns up, then I'm not going to reset it to Japan, because much like Japan is a character, Kidderminster is a character. But I think at this point, if I have a Kidderminster story and a Japan story, then I might be more inclined to write the Japan one at first. But it's bizarre because I think particularly if you take the girl in the video and Daddy's Boy, both of them seem to have the potential to be the one that hits big for me. There's things with both of them going on in the background, and in a way, they couldn't be more different. But I feel like my career is not necessarily splitting, but that something might happen that will depend on whether I am more a dark comedy writer or I am more a horror writer with elements of comedy that specifically sets things in Japan. Maybe I establish myself as both. That would be great, but we got to see what happens. And the market, the sales, the readers, they dictate a lot more than perhaps we'd like them to. And it's a bizarre thing that we've said before, because we can put a lot of worth on the sales and on the acclaim and on hitting or not hitting a bestseller list. But the weird thing is, whatever happens external to us, it's still the same bloody story. So why are we putting so much worth on these external things?
It's a fair question. I mean, part of what I was wondering was whether some of it had come down to the psychology of home. And, the girl in the video, was your certainly the first one I'd read of your stories that was set in Japan. And then maybe similarly with Daddy's Boy, you'd been living abroad for a long time. I wonder if the girl in the video was you searching for a home in Japan at that particular point in your life, and Daddy's Boy addressing maybe the lost love for the UK and searching for a home in that respect after many years away. I wonder if there are some parallels there that kind of draw them both into, being some of your more successful in certain terms, or, certainly creative stories in terms of your output.
Yeah, the concept of home is a funny one because, I've had people before. I'm trying to think how to phrase this and what specifically has been said to me. But, that there can sometimes be a bit of pushback having a white British person writing about an experience in Japan. Well, that's why I'm specifically, looking at writing Gaijin J-Horror. This is an experience in Japan from the Gaijin perspective. But yeah, like I say, there are some people who they will feel a bit funny about, an outsider writing about the Japan experience. And there's another book that I'm writing where the main character is half Japanese and half British. And, at one point I wanted to make that main character just Japanese, but because it's something that I'm co-writing, there was a big discussion and the co-writer wasn't so comfortable with that. Some of the short stories I've written have been all Japanese characters. Look at the bonus story, Teka Teka Teka. So there's that element, and but I think if I can't write about Japan, then where can I write about? And then with the UK, there was another story where I showed it to a friend, and they said, "Oh, some of these things that you're saying happen in the UK, they haven't happened for about 10 years now. That's not actually what the UK is like." And so I almost felt a paralysis where it's like some people are saying you can't write about this, some people are saying you can't write about that. And but ultimately there can be a kind of liberation and a freedom, and it's something that me and Bob go back to, where it's like, look, you can write about anything, just don't screw it up. I think that is a butchering of the Colson Whitehead quote that Bob trots out every other episode. And it's not even write what you know necessarily, it's just know what you write. And so that's where I've landed. But then, if you almost existentially ask me, God, maybe you shouldn't ask me where is home. I might have a panic attack. I might have a breakdown on the podcast. Like, where is home? I don't know, Dan. This is where I live. I mean, Japan is the nearest that I've felt to home out of anywhere that I've ever lived. But I don't have so many friends or family here. That's just the reality. So there is a division where it's like I'm being pulled into England in one direction, pulled into Japan in the other. It's like the place of Japan is home. My wife, my kids are here, but then other family members and friends are in the UK. The language that I'm most familiar with is English, is in the UK. So then there's probably nowhere that I can say fully and completely fits the definition of home. There are aspects of home in both places. But I do know that, interestingly, when I was living in Portugal, I got a kind of feeling akin to homesickness where I was missing Japan. And I felt great regret that I wasn't in Japan anymore. And even when there was a period of time when I was back in the UK, I felt a sickness and a longing to be back in Japan. So I think we can say that Japan is where I belong. if we can't completely define home, to answer the question you didn't quite ask.
I think we've been talking so long, I can't 100% remember what the question I asked was. But I do think it's interesting, really. Like, I think both of us kind of went through periods of great change in 2016. You know, you're talking about living in Japan and doing the story a week challenge. That's something that I wasn't hugely involved in because 2016 was the year that my daughter was born, and there wasn't a huge amount of writing being done. And one of the things that I think was interesting, so I brought out my short story collection in 2021, and a lot of the stories were written after my daughter was born. It was only when I saw a review, somebody had said, this is a collection that is about becoming a father for the first time. And I was like, is it? You know, you can kind of write something from the subconscious that, you know, maybe you don't realize you're writing at the time until somebody points it out. You know, would you say that horror is your outlet to telling people about whether Japan's home or not, just how much you love and kind of relate to that country? It's certainly, from my point of view, as somebody, you know, looking from the outside in to your experience living there, certainly a hugely kind of Japanese influenced book, and one that I couldn't have written having not been to the country. So how does that kind of sit with you as kind of a love letter? And do you think there's more layers to this story than perhaps, you know, looking back on it as a reissue now, that perhaps you realised at the time of writing?
So I think that there's a lot of autobiography in every single story that I write, and people who know me can often see those elements of my life coming into it. And sometimes it's very obvious, and sometimes it might just be a little line or a little nod. And so I've actually found, even through writing short stories, if I reread my own work, which I don't do a lot, I don't have a habit of, oh, I'm looking for a good story today, I'll pick up one of mine. But when I do see lines from my work, it can take me back to exactly the place that I was, not even just like the geographical location, but the headspace, the things that I was thinking, the concerns that I had. So, of course, reissuing this and going back through and proofreading and doing some very minor edits to it, it got me into that headspace. And I think what's interesting with the girl in the video as well is there's currently a movie version, which I can't talk about too much, but you know, at the moment that it is a little bit, well, it's a fair bit different to the original novella. And Bob and I had a similar experience with Their Watching, in that we wrote a screenplay for Their Watching. So then it's almost like, well, hang on, which is the story in my mind? There's two different stories now. There's two versions of the same story, and they almost become part of this wider world. So I would say, you know, through the current film version that I'm quite involved in, anything that I thought was missing in the book, I've now been able to kind of update that. But with the book itself, when I put out the second edition, I wanted it to be an honest reflection as to where I was when I originally wrote it. So there hasn't really been anything that I've changed in terms of the actual text. Even though my writing style has changed a little bit, it's evolved in a certain way. But you know, The Girl in the Video has been my most popular book, so it wasn't the time to rewrite that.
It's really interesting, isn't it? At the moment, one of my short stories is being adapted for film by a chap in America, and I found it a really interesting process. And just listening to you speaking now, I can identify, because we'll back and forth about different ideas for where to take it. It's a bit different with this one because it's just a short and we're expanding it to a feature. But I've come back from our conversations and thought, I wish I'd thought of that. Or maybe I should have taken the book in that direction. Or maybe we should have taken a short in that direction rather. And I was interested to hear how much that's happened with Girl in the Video, as it was a fairly early work for you, and it's a decade on. How have you reapproached it, and are there things that you're happier with this time around? Have you made a lot of changes, I guess, in the reissue?
In terms of the actual main story, there's been very few changes. It's a very honest reflection as to what Perpetual Motion Machine put out in 2020. One of the changes I have made, as someone concerned with presentation and aesthetics, is that in the Perpetual Motion Machine version, there were no chapters, but I've actually put chapters in. So when there's a new day, that is marked as a new chapter. And I felt that aesthetically, it made the interior of the book look better. And I just felt like psychologically it gives the reader more breathing room. It feels more of a complete piece and moves it more into, a full book rather than it being a long short story. So that there was that change. This wasn't me rewriting The Girl in the Video. This wasn't me coming up with, the definitive or the expanded version. This came about because Perpetual Motion Machine Publishing took out of print all of the titles that were under the PMMP banner. So they've only got titles out that were ghoulish books, and that was completely the right decision for them. That's not something that I need to talk about, but Max Booth has been very transparent about that, so you can find out more through looking at ghoulish books and reading about that. But I think in many ways it was a long time coming, because the aesthetic brand of ghoulish and what they're doing is actually very different to what they were doing when they were PMMP. So in terms of the book, and in terms of a reissue where I might rewrite it, that would be something that, if a publisher approached me to do that in the future, then I would consider, but it would be a different book. It would be a different story. This was simply an exercise in making sure that my most popular book was still in print. But we have got new cover art from Ben Baldwin, and I feel that is a more honest reflection of the book. It is a more honest reflection of Gaijin J-Horror. And it is a more honest reflection of my intent in terms of what I want to be doing as I write more Gaijin J-Horror stories. It just felt that it really reflected the book better. The original cover by Piper is fantastic. It's so eye-catching. But this one, I think it tells you more upfront the story that you're going to get. And I think that was the right move for this time in my career and what I want to do. In terms of other bonuses, I mentioned there's the Teka short story, and there's also the afterword, in which I primarily talk about the film journey, and I give a bit of a peek behind the curtain, because I think people don't talk transparently about these kind of things, and I wanted to do that as much as I could. And, literally as much as I could, because the reason a lot of people don't talk about these things is they then have to sign NDAs, or there are just things so in progress that it's ill-advised to be talking about them at this moment. But, I had an opportunity with the first film adaptation essentially lapsing, and now us being on the second is like, right, well, I can talk about the first now because that's all done. And yeah, there was a point where I wondered about, because it was just about keeping it in print. I asked Pi, and he even said I could keep the original Piper. The original Piper, that's his fucking name. The original cover art. And then I could have literally just almost put out the exact same book. But I thought, if I'm going to go to the effort of reissuing it, I want to be able to deliver something extra for the reader. And I think as well, in giving it the new cover art, in giving it the afterword, and in giving it the short story, not only have I given people a reason to buy the second edition, but I would assume I have now added value to the first edition because it's now a much rarer item. You can't get, that first edition with that cover art anywhere else apart from now picking up a second-hand copy via PMMP. But I think there might be somehow a new one still on Amazon.com. So
eBay.
Yeah.
I've got a bit of a question for Dave there as well, and for Michael too, because Dave is currently in the process of reissuing Hater 20 years after the first edition of it. So this is a question for both of you really, because I'm not that far down kind of my author journey to the point where I kind of need to do that with any of my books, or have felt compelled to do so. When you come into approaching that as a book that's already been out, what are your thoughts in terms of, adding value, improving kind of the product? I don't necessarily mean changing the story, but also kind of, in terms of where you draw the line of what value, what changes you want to make, what you want to add to it. Because, I think we're all there as writers where, you could get to the end of almost any story and think, I could keep going back and keep going back and keep going back and never truly finish anything. So what's kind of your approach, both of you really, I would say, to kind of bringing those stories and those books back to life and aiming for a new readership with them?
It's been, for me, it started off as really a tidying up process because I'd released quite a few independent books over the years. I'm not talking about Hater here. I'm just talking over the last few years, I released some of my older standalone books. I re-released them. So Strangers and Straight to You I completely rewrote because similar to what you were saying earlier, Michael, about how it was you, Dan, talking about how people could tell that you were this book was written by a parent. I wrote Straight to You when I was just a bloke living upstairs in mum and dad's house and no life experience whatsoever, and then looked at it again 10 years later and thought, good grief, that's terrible, and had to redo the whole thing. But in the other re-releases, I've really tried to add some value. So I've wanted to go back and do complete re-edits and add new stories and things like that. But I'm also very mindful of not going down the George Lucas route too badly, and just adding tweaks for the sakes of tweaks. The Hater thing for me is a little bit different because it's my biggest selling book. Fingers crossed we will see some real movement on the movie this year. I've shared something with you recently, Michael, about an interesting development on there, and things do seem to be moving. But it just seemed that 20 years was too good an opportunity to miss. So I thought I'll re-release that. I got an agreement from the publishers at St. Martin's Press in America to do a very limited run, but I've really gone for it. And this one is an illustrated version. There'll be illustrated end papers. It'll be a fancier production in terms of the hardcover. It'll be like foil backed and sprayed edges and all that malarkey. but also some extra stories as well, and a kind of essay about the behind the scenes of it and how it affected me and how it feels to me 20 years on. So that was a very different experience. But I'm getting old, so I've got that kind of gap between a book being released and today, and it just seemed like a good thing to do, and hopefully earn a few quid in the process, because we've got to eat, So I don't know about you, Michael, but it depends on the project, really, I guess, is what I'm saying, and how I approach the reissue.
It's interesting that, for me, I've gone from the start of this year having no re-releases to now I've got 2 re-releases, because of course before this Girl in the Video second edition, Thunderstorm Books put out a limited hardcover of Daddy's Boy. So that's, I guess, in a way more akin to what you're doing with Hater, because it's not replacing the original edition as such, but this is deliberately marketed as a premium product. This is limited. This is gonna have the price tag to match. And so I think when you know that you're going to be charging a premium price as well, that's a little bit different than if you're just reissuing the paperback in the second edition. So then with that, again, we have new cover art, again by Ben Baldwin. So he seems to be like my reissue cover art guy. And there is a introduction from David Moody, which is in the
Not him
Daddy's Boy.
again.
Yeah. so we've got the introduction. We have the story, again, very similar, probably even less tweaks than with the Girl in the Video. And then I wrote an afterword, and the time when I was writing the afterword, like, I wasn't sure, what am I going to write in this afterword? And then unfortunately my grandfather passed away at the grand old age of 95. So it's remarkable, that he lived so long. But he's the kindest person I've ever known. He was so instrumental and encouraging in terms of encouraging me to be a writer, to follow my creativity. And he just really modeled to me what it is to be a good human being, a kind human being, a compassionate human being. And so I thought, well, the afterword, somehow I decided I'm going to tie in an afterword to the crudest, dark comedic book I've ever written.
I was just
and
going
a
to say,
tribute to the kindest person.
It's ironic you saying that when you've got written a book full of absolute deplorables.
I know. So it was almost like approaching the impossible. Any other book would have been better to include a tribute to my grandfather in, but that was how the cards were dealt. That was the order that it all happened in. And from the feedback, including I've sent it to family members, but I've omitted the only thing I've omitted from the version to the family members is the strap in or strap on. I know they don't need that. Also, they've not read Daddy's Boy, so what the fuck is he even talking about? For people who haven't read it, that there's a lot of dick jokes, there's a lot of innuendo, but the feedback I get is that the afterwards, somehow I pulled it off, which again is a dodgy thing to say when talking about Daddy's Boy. But yeah, I was going to say I nailed it. You can't say anything when it comes to Daddy's Boy. I did a good job, is what people have told me. And then also, because for the Daddy's Boy special edition, it was like, what can I do that will really add value? And that's what I try to do when reissuing something. I'm not going to throw something in for the sake of it. It has to add value. There has to be a point. It's not about, inflating the page count or being able to say you did something extra. That's why it was so difficult to write the afterword, because it needed to count. And so the thing that I came up with and was to have a glossary, because there's so many bizarrely British terms. There's so much euphemistic language. There's also a lot of references to obscure British celebrities like John Fashanu, like Rolf Harris. Oh, don't mention him on the podcast. Well, it's happened now, hasn't it? Cancel me. No, please don't. But anyway, this is the kind of awkward tone that if you like this, you'll get something like that in Daddy's Boy. But yeah, people in Daddy's Boy, particularly when I'd been interviewed as well, they didn't know some of the terms. And I thought, well, this is an opportunity to include a hopefully amusing glossary. So yeah, those were the additions to Daddy's Boy, but the rule is only add something if it will add value. Don't add it for the sake of it. That's the approach.
Yeah, I'm sorry, press the wrong button there. I agree completely. Yeah, I think that the glossary is really important as well. I had an experience a few years back when I was talking about the Black Country, which is, for anybody who's from the Midlands, that the Wolverhampton, Sandwell, all of that is the Black Country, because historically it was very built up and industrialised and was covered in soot. But I had somebody take exception because they weren't aware of the nuances. So we joke about about your glossary, which is very comprehensive, I must say. But it has an important point as well, and I agree with you completely. It adds value, and that's the thing. I would never put something out for a second time if it wasn't substantially different. It goes against everything that I've done throughout my career. I mean, this is that I hate the idea of people buying more than one format of one of my books. So I have this little system on my website, and if somebody buys a print edition, they can go to a certain page, go to a page on my website, look up a page in the book, type in a certain word that's on there, and get a free ebook edition. Because I really don't like the idea of people having to buy that and then the audio book and now another version of Hater. So it's just about not burning your bridges with the readers, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I've done things like that before. And in fact, and this wasn't a planned plug, but if people buy The Girl in the Video via This Is Horror and they buy the paperback, then I will send them the audiobook, which is the original audiobook narrated by R.J. Bailey. And then I will send them the ebook as well. And I know that me and Dave have had this conversation for years now. It's like, look, if you've bought the book, we want you to experience the book. We don't want you to have to, buy the other format because you've decided that's how you want to have it. So buy the paperback and we'll give you the rest.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is horror.co.uk. You can buy The Girl in the Video now.
It's those kind of bonuses and kind of that kind of customer forethought that sets indie publishing apart from traditional in many ways as well, doesn't it? Really, it's in the kind of cruel world of traditional publishing, it's pay me once for each format, and pay for those in a lot of cases. So to make it accessible to readers like that is something that we as kind of indies have the flexibility to do, and looking after those readers as well. And I think to offer something new to people who everybody on this call, Bob, Dave, myself, we've all read The Girl in the Video. There's going to be people on here who have known of you for a long time who perhaps for whatever reason haven't got around to picking up The Girl in the Video. Well, now's the time. And to be able to get it in a number of formats for the same price is surely appealing. Like, for example, got here still unpacking. 2 copies of Solace House by Will MacLean, who is an awesome author. I ended up buying it on Kindle because it's an unwieldy hardback, and I have a habit of falling asleep while reading, and I didn't want to knock my teeth out with an enormous hardback book when I could, fall asleep reading my Kindle. So I picked it up for 99p as well. But to encompass those kind of media within one purchase is something to be promoted, really, particularly when the audiobook is as well read as and as well produced as yours is, Michael. It's really, really good piece of audio fiction there.
I really do appreciate any writer who puts out and gives a reader opportunity to get the book in whatever format they want. I tend to do a lot of ebooks simply because I live in an apartment. I don't have the storage space for paperbacks and hardbacks. I do have some, but a lot of that stuff is in storage right now. So it's just because I just don't have a place to put it. And I just noticed a new book that's coming out from a big name publisher, and the ebook is $20. There's no overhead on an ebook. It's a file. So I really, really do appreciate when people give a reader another alternative. You buy one, you get it all. That's to me, I think that is what you should do.
I remember having that argument when Hater first came out, when it was first published by anybody other than Infected Books, because I was selling the ebook for £1 or whatever it was at the time, and suddenly it's I think it was $10 or $12, something like that, and I got straight onto my editor and said, "How can you price it like that?" "Oh, overheads. Oh, we've invested in 50,000 print copies or whatever we've done." But ultimately, that I still feel that stops your work getting out to as many people as possible. I tried to get the rights back from some of my books that are with St. Martin's Press recently, and they wanted to hold on to them, so I haven't got them. But what they did say is we'll reduce the ebook prices for a bit, and it's really interesting to see how many books flew off the shelves, the virtual shelves, when they slashed the price from $10 to $2, $3. It seems like false economics, and you'd think that by this stage, I think that when ebooks are so prevalent, that publishers, even the big publishers, would be taking a different approach. But then, as well, I guess that they benefit from marketing it when they do drop the price. That's a special event for them, and it can get on the Amazon daily low price email, whatever. It's a way of extracting more, I think.
I think a lot of us subscribe. I subscribe to BookBub, which definitely helps out, where you can get books for $2 or $3, and they have new releases, old releases, things like that. It's funny too, because who would have thought? There's an author that is pretty much now nobody really likes her anymore, J.K. Rowling. When her original contract did not include ebooks, the publisher, it took them a while to realize how fucked they were, and that was really kind of savvy, because from what I read, it was like, can she, she basically said, "Can I have all the electronic rights?" And they're like, "Yeah, nobody's going to do anything with those." Wrong answer. So, if they could have like continued to believe that would have been really good. It's like, man, what's the deal with these writers and their electronic rights? It's like, well, we'll just give it to them. That's fine.
I think those days are long, long gone, Bob, aren't they? Let's face it. I think it raises like an interesting point for you, though, Michael, because you've, much like myself, we've got kind of those aspirations to be traditionally published, and those are the standards that we kind of set for ourselves. So when it comes to you, being in charge of publishing, your own work, what kind of standards do you set yourself in terms of the quality of of the story, but also the quality of the output that you kind of, in terms of, be it the physical or the audio or the electronic copy. Like I think that that's something that, certainly was one of the things I took from our friendship early doors, was that, you set extremely high standards for yourself. So how does that translate into, this reissue?
Well, I've mentioned this before, but this is actually something that comes from an early conversation with Dave, and it may have even been the first one. But when Dave was talking about independent publishing, and when he puts out a book via Infected Books, the standard is that he wants the book, if it's next to other traditionally published books, you cannot tell which is the indie book and which is the one that has come out via the mainstream publisher. And so that was something that Dave said over a decade ago now. And that is something that has always stuck with me. And that is my standard. So, the first calling card is the cover art. That is why I am so particular about it. That is why I don't skimp on the cover art. That is why, if I need to, then I will go back and forth with the cover artist, much as I will with edits, much as I will with anything. Look, Dan knows particularly how bloody pedantic I am. In fact, I think you all know how pedantic I am. And so that is the standard.
You're an absolute bastard for it, Michael. Let's
Right.
not cut any corners.
But also, when I do this to other people, I do it even more to myself. So if anyone's had an annoying experience with me, everyone listening is like, yeah, I've had that. Then it is nothing compared to the high standard that I will set myself, and how pedantic I will be with my own releases, with my own work. And yeah, if, it's, I have annoyed people before with how high my standards are, but I can't accept that if there's even a minor error, that it will go out like that. It doesn't sit right with me. So it has to look the part. It has to be indistinguishable from a traditionally published book. And I've said before, I said on the ARC party, which you mentioned previously, Dan, there was one of my books that was going to come out with a different publisher. They'd left some widows and orphans in, meaning a word dangling on a line on its own, either at the top or the bottom of a page.
Criminal. Yeah.
To me, yes.
Yeah. No, I agree.
And so I said, look, you can't do that. And they said, well, this is the way we've always done it. And I said, well, this isn't how a professional publisher does it. And if that's a deal breaker, then I'd like the rights back. And it was a deal breaker, and I got the rights back and, put it out with a different publisher. And it's a better story, because at the time it was a novella. It was then expanded into a novel with House of Bad Memories. There you go. You can Google it and find out the rest of the history. But I take what I'm doing very seriously. I don't see myself as a hobbyist. I don't see myself as an amateur. This is, writing stories is the most professional thing that I do. It is the thing that I take the most seriously. I take it more seriously than the podcast, and I have fairly high standards for the podcast. But when I was growing up, I didn't think, oh, I'd love to be a podcaster. No, I mean, they didn't exist. So that would have been weird. But I wanted to be a storyteller. I wanted to be a professional author. So yeah, that is the standard. That is what I do. And so in terms of the girl in the video, any editing was just if I noticed there was a comma that I didn't quite agree with the placing, or if I thought a comma needed to be inserted, or a little N dash here, something like that. Dan knows all about my N dash M dash hyphen history. I think I
Yeah.
fucking gave him nightmares for years over that. But it's all about
still in therapy, Michael.
Yeah, and
After those edits,
I can't cut corners and I can't do things on the cheap. And if that is going to be the case, then I'd rather not do it at all. It's either I do it to the best of my ability or I don't bother. And I've always put things out in audiobook as well because I love audio. And I do believe that it is a growing medium, but I haven't had that many sales in audio comparative to the cost of putting out an audiobook. So if I independently put out another one of my novels, I don't know if I'll put the audiobook out because I don't know if I can justify the cost. And that's a really shitty position to be in. But we're always having this struggle between creativity and the art and commerce. If this is more than just a hobbyist, I want to have this as my full-time job. So, do I put the audiobook out because I love audiobooks, but know that this is like a personal loss, and then I just have to almost view it as if I'm going on a holiday, but I'm just actually sitting in my office annoying a narrator as I make pedantic little notes about, I think you didn't pause for long enough here. And then we can't work together again. But I don't know. I might not be able to do that. And I've said before, I think hopefully going forward, I will be able to have a literary agent and I will be able to be with a publisher and not putting things out independently, because the thing I want to do at the moment, I just want to write. There's so much that we have to do when, there's so much even as just the writer, but when you're the publisher as well, marketing, the accounts, the social media presence, it takes so long. And when I look at the end of my life, I want to see all these stories that I wrote, not that I spent hours meticulously putting together fucking TikTok videos. At the moment, very current, but I've noticed on Instagram, people just putting up here are the 5 or the 10 books in this obscure category. Here are the 10 horror books you should read if you like Japanese samurai swords, or here's the 10 books you should read if you like walking in the forest. Here's the 10 books to read if you're on the toilet doing a number 2. It's ridiculous. And so many people are jumping on that bandwagon, and I don't even fucking blame them, because we all want to make money. We all want to be seen. But it doesn't seem like it's a terribly fulfilling thing. And probably in the moment when I would be putting something like that together, I would be hating myself. So, a rule of life is the less you can hate yourself, the better. And it's just nutritionally devoid work. There is no substance. There is no intellect. There is no joy to be had. Sometimes probably when people read things like Daddy's Boy, they might think this is a ridiculous thing to say, but I want to be putting things out of worth and of substance. And as many fucking dick jokes as there are, I fucking sweated over every dick joke. And I really made every word count. There is not a single word that is unintentional. Every decision I have meticulously made. So Anyway, that's
Can
why
I just say, Michael,
you
I'm
can.
really looking forward to the day the film version for The Girl in the Video hits, and this book gets picked up or advertised or whatever, and you have to dress up and dance on TikTok or something, and we can pull this clip and just really, really enjoy those moments. I personally, I hope you hit it big for many reasons, but I think that is actually very close to my top reason now, just to see you have to go through that promotional grind and know that I can see in your eyes all the time you're dancing on TikTok that you are dying inside. That will make me,
I
as your friend, so, so happy.
I don't believe in doing anything inauthentic. And as I'm saying that, I'm imagining now, like, in years to come, that you get that clip. I don't believe in doing anything inauthentic. Then it cuts to me
Uh,
in a fucking Hello Kitty mask. Nobody
Bookmark this
needs to
moment.
fucking see that, but it's no. I think part of the reason that it is often so sad and so depressing for me personally is so you could spend all this time putting, like, the perfect TikTok together, and then hardly anyone sees it. So it's like, so I wasted all of that time and nothing happened. But then if I've got a mainstream publishing deal and they're like, wear the Hello Kitty costume, you're going to get the equivalent of so many thousands of pounds. Well, now that there's a literal payoff. So I guess what I'm saying is, like, look, I'll sell out, but it better be for a good price.
Yeah, yeah, you have morals, we'll sell them. But I think this is quite an interesting parallel with the story itself. It's the book is a comment on social media and the digital age. In and of itself,
Yeah.
it's fascinating to kind of hear you talk about the promotion of it when so much of the story is based around those awful black rectangles that dominate our lives. It's yeah, I mean, there must have been some genuine real world anxieties that filtered into that book, because I must admit, when reading it, they it kind of surfaced in my mind at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's even more relevant now with the rise of AI,
Definitely.
and well, I mean, if I was writing the story now, it would be a different story, because when you're getting these personalized videos, of course it would come into your head that maybe this is AI. Maybe somebody has, they could quickly search my profile without even properly searching it. They could come out with what seems like a more personalized video. So, in a sense, the girl in the video is scarier for being set at a time where you didn't have access to that, because then there's much more likelihood that somebody has literally stalked you, gone through all your videos, found out all this information. But then there's an argument that it's even more terrifying now, because fucking anyone, even someone who doesn't know you, could make it seem like they do. They could have a very personal insight into your life. And I think, obviously the moral of this story, and we've said for a long time, be very careful in terms of what you put out online. And that is something that I'm careful of. And I would say that I've been more private online about my personal life after I got divorced. I was going to say after my first divorce. That sounds like a second one's coming if I say that. But so I haven't put any photos up of me with my wife. I haven't put any photos up of me, with my kids since the divorce, and I'm just a little bit more guarded as well. So, of course, I put myself out, here on the podcast in video form every week, but beyond this little rectangle, you don't get a lot of my private life. Although I am, I guess honest, vulnerable, authentic in talking about it, but my limit is putting like photos and videos up for public consumption, and we all have to decide what are our lines, and we all reserve the right to change the rules and change the way that we operate and we publish things on social media at any given moment. But there must be, for a lot of people, a conflict, because then we're fucking rewarded by putting our most intimate, or hopefully not our most intimate, but a lot of our private moments online. Although some people are rewarded for their most intimate moments. Like if you have a good OnlyFans profile, then cash cow.
And is that like you're talking about the evolution of, social media, the evolution of morality, I would say, perhaps within the last 10 years since this book was written. So, you've talked pretty often in interviews and on the podcast, and certainly within the afterword to the book, about the development of the film. Being involved in that, was that something that you kind of considered in terms of how perhaps the story could hit differently, now as opposed to 2016, 2017 when it was written? Because 10 years on from that, people are, 10, 11 years more online, if you will, than they were at the point that you wrote it. You talked about it being more relevant. How did that play out when you were going through those discussions about the film version, and did the change in technology and the change in people's views towards it factor in when you were having those meetings and those calls about the film version?
So this is where I have to be a little bit careful, because the question is now really relevant to the second iteration of the film version rather than the first one, which I can publicly talk about. But the easy way to answer it is yes, that absolutely has factored in. And I feel that the film version and vision at the moment is the truest and the best form of the girl in the video for this current generation. I think that the team that is working on it is the best possible team. If this is made into a film, which we hope it will be, but you never know with Hollywood, then I will be very happy. I have not been happier than where we are with the film right now.
That's good to hear. And as somebody who's looking forward to seeing it hit the screens, that's more than encouraging, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah.
Bob, you had your hand up a little while ago. Do you want to chip in? Sorry, mate.
Oh, that was back when we were talking about the M dash, and yes, I've had my experience with that. I know exactly where to find all of the symbols now on the This Is Horror website. So yes, Michael instructed me properly.
Glad to hear that my instruction was not for nothing. Yeah. Yeah, I've annoyed numerous people, as I said, with the N-M-hyphen distinction, but again, I do think it's important. Get it right. That's it. Next question.
Anyone else, or you wait? I chip in.
Well, I'm looking at your quarter of the screen, Dan, even though you can't tell.
I think one of the things that I'm interested in is, you kind of touched on it before when we first started talking, probably 2010, 2011, around that time. I think we both freely admit now, both of us talked more about writing than we were actually writing at that particular point in our lives. And things have changed a lot for both of us since then, and for the better in terms of our output and those kind of things. But what I'm interested in is, when you look back now, almost 10 years later, on having written this novella, the novella that has kind of launched you as a writer, what has changed in terms of your process, and what has changed in your approach to story based on, you looking back at yourself all those years later? I'd be fascinated to see if this process has led to you learning more about yourself as a writer, and things that you do or might want to change moving forward in terms of your writing.
I mean, in terms of changes, I think right now I am writing the truest to me and my vision and who I am. And I think if you look at the girl in the video, I was dabbling a little bit with the humor and my comedic side. And then you've seen Daddy's Boy, and that's what happens when it's fully unleashed. I think as well, when I was writing the girl in the video, I was more conscious of and mindful of writing rules. Whereas now I would say I have the experience to know the writing rules and to consciously decide when I'm going to break them. There's a scene in House of Bad Memories where there's a very long-winded conversation in a car, and some beta readers, possibly including you, Dan, picked up on it. And they're like, "Oh, I'm not sure if you can do that." And, it's a bit awkward. But that was the effect that I was going for. So I think as well, like I've always enjoyed things that are dialogue heavy, and I have, for better or for worse, and different reviewers will have different opinions on this, I have lent much more into the almost Tarantino-esque long-winded conversations. But every conversation, as long as it will have a purpose. Each line in my mind is necessary. Either it's advancing a character, or it's creating tension, it's showing us something. So we never have what Chuck Palahniuk terms as ping pong dialogue. It's always advancing. It's not just throwing the words back and forth. So that is a way that I've changed. And yeah, that was something I was very mindful of with the girl in the video. It's something I'm a bit mindful of now as I'm expanding my novella, What Would Wesley Do, into a novel. That, like, now I include kind of richer conversations that are certainly longer, but I think for the better. But it's interesting too, because then the girl in the video is the most commercially successful. So I wonder if my more honest, authentic style to me is not what the general reader wants. But at the same time, that is me, so that is what you're going to get. But there is a cruelty if me being me then doesn't see the commercial success of me being slightly more restrained. I think in terms of other changes, back then I was writing things that were more novellas. These days, most ideas that come to me are in novel form. So I'm much more comfortable writing longer stories. Back then I was just getting my writing routine. But, you mentioned 2010 and 2011, and we weren't writing as much as we wanted to. My drive to write has always been there, but I think there was a fear. There was a fear that deepened when I started doing This Is Horror podcast, because I felt I'm interviewing all these legends of horror and all these accomplished writers. And there was a fear of me putting something out in the world and it just being disappointing. It's like you've interviewed Adam Neville and Ramsey Campbell, and this is what you're presenting, particularly when I knew that aesthetically, with the comedy, with the dialogue, it's very, very different. but for some reason, probably the one story per week challenge and people responding favorably to it, I don't know. For better or for worse, I am going to put these stories out, and I became free of, I suppose, that prison of doubt, that prison of rejection. Whereas now maybe people won't like it, but fuck it. I like it. I'm glad that I wrote this. And so back in the day, I would procrastinate and I would do anything but write. Whereas now, I feel it's actually the reverse. Probably it's better to have a balance, but now I will write at the expense of almost anything else. As I say, probably better to have a balance, but if I had to choose between one extreme, I'd rather be procrastinating through writing than procrastinating through anything other than writing. So now I'm writing every day. And like I said, like I'd rather be writing than doing all the kind of marketing and the writing tangential things. Podcasting is my favorite type of writing because it doesn't feel bullshit. It doesn't feel inauthentic. Coming up with a listicle, coming up with a Instagram recommendation of books, I mean, if not inauthentic, then it's inefficient. Why do I need to put a fucking picture of the secret dinner in Kemberton when I can just write in a Blue Sky post, these are my 2 favorite books of the year. There you go. 30 seconds. 25 minutes to put that in an Instagram post. Tag everyone. What am I doing with my life?
As long as you're telling people how good Kemberton is, I think you're on to a winner, no matter how you do
cheers,
it.
guys. Thank you. We did this last time, so
yeah.
But
I'm just chipping in now. Now I've got a microphone for this one. But yeah. Go on, Bob. You had your hand up before. I think you had a question while Michael was.
Well, it's just a comment that, and it's been really fascinating to see. But I didn't know, I didn't realize that you had this fear, and so that really comes as a surprise to me. And I love how you overcame it. You quit self-rejecting. And that's, I think that's something that every writer goes through, a stage, whether it's at the beginning, it can happen at any time, where we begin to doubt our abilities. And when we really shouldn't at all, we should embrace our work fearlessly. And that self-rejection, it's a bad thing. I recently went through some of that, and so now I'm kind of like I've given myself permission to write as shitty as I possibly can, and it's not shitty at all, but just to get words on the page, because you got to write. That's the whole thing, and you don't know what you have till you write it. And so if anything, don't self-reject.
Yeah, no, that's not something I do anymore. And I think as well, I must be good at projecting confidence, because also there was something recently with Dan where I was feeling the pressure about a written project that I had to submit that I have to skirt around a little bit because I can't talk about it properly. And there was a little bit of doubt as to how it's going to be received. And, Dan said that was quite surprising for him because he said he'd never really heard me, at least in recent years, have any doubt about, what I'm doing or what I'm submitting. But yeah, I guess like a lot of people, I can have initial doubt with something new until I then get like, okay, something positive back, or it's not as bad as I feared. Yeah, it was weird in a sense, I suppose, that I had this English literature and creative writing degree, a decent degree from Warwick, but I was worried that everyone would think, oh, you can't write well. And then and then that was going to be the end of me. That was going to be the end of This Is Horror. I remember too, because I started This Is Horror in my 20s, and then I'm talking to nearly everyone is much older than me, almost feeling some doubt about my age, or like I'm an imposter. I think I felt doubt about a lot of things, but I just have to kind of push it down. Or it's not even as simple as saying, I strongly feel doubt. It's like there's two fucking voices, not in a kind of The Shining, I'm about to murder my family kind of way, but you've got the one voice being like, you're not good enough, you're an imposter, what the fuck are you doing? And then the other saying, shut the fuck up, I'm doing a good job. I've got like 4 novels out, or whatever, and just providing the evidence, but it can be a constant to and fro. And so, then the next thing on my kind of to-do list, or my white whale list, Dan sometimes puts it, is to either have one of my books made into a film, or to get picked up by a publisher or literary agent. But like I said at the start, it is funny that these external things are what will ultimately validate me, and I'll still be writing stories either way. But I think it's because we do live in a capitalist society. We do live in a society where money is needed to function, and I want to be able to provide not just for myself but for my family through writing. That's what I want to do. And, I spoke about in my 20s, I had some imposter syndrome because of my age. Now, ironically, having just turned 40, I feel more pressure. Like, come on, you've been writing for years. Where's the fucking result? Why aren't you completely comfortably doing this full time? There will be
Well,
writers who are doing it full time who are like,
yeah,
I've got bad news for you. Completely comfortably might not be how you'll ever be able to describe
I
your
think I can
writing
pass
career.
on a new anxiety to you,
Oh,
Michael, because
God.
I'm a year older than you, and you've just turned 40.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've thought about pretty much every time I sit down to write, particularly a new story, since I turned 40, is fucking hell, you might be dead soon. You need to get all these written. So there's a pressure to choose the right book, to deliver it well, to make sure that you're doing every story justice, because you're now on the other side of that kind of midpoint of your life. If we're lucky, we'll get 80 plus years, and hopefully we'll all get as many years as your granddad did,
Yeah.
live to a good
Yeah.
age, and fair play to him. But yeah, you kind of sit down and think, in your 20s, you're like, oh shit, I don't know if I can validate this. I don't know if I can, speak to the experience I've had and all those kind of things. But you sit down in your 40s and think, fucking hell, got to make this one count, because you never know how many more there's going to be. So there's a new anxiety to pass on to you every time you sit down. But yeah, I just sit down and write and think, yeah, not today, doubt. You can fuck right off. And that's usually a pretty good way to start the day, in my opinion. But yeah, just thought I'd pass on that little nugget of misery to you
Yeah.
to celebrate your new book coming out.
Yeah. I mean, one of the wonderful things about doing the This Is Horror podcast is getting to talk to all of these writers and these experts, and even little comments that maybe were meant as just innocuous, or they were meant as just a straight answer to a question, like Dave talking about the standard that he sets with his independent books. that one line I can remember for the rest of my life. And so when we were talking to Craig Clevenger, he spoke about how he puts everything into the book that he's writing as if it's his last. And that was very effective for me too, because I think, there might have been a point where I felt like, oh, well, I'll hold this back for the next one, or oh, I won't put this joke in this particular book, or I might not explore this issue. But it's like, no, if this is something I want to explore, then and as a vehicle in the story that I'm currently writing, then bloody well get it in, write the book as if it's your last. And then as a kind of another point in terms of things that have stuck with me, I don't even know why, but at some point when Bob was talking about doubt, he said you have to fake it till you make it, which is obviously such a kind of cliche thing, but I don't know. He's absolutely right. And that's what I do. Any moment of doubt, I will fake it till I make it. And also Tim Ferriss said a similar thing. It's like, let's say I don't think I'm a good teacher. Why don't I act and do what I think a good teacher would do? So it is the fake it till you make it mentality. Is like, right, what would a good writer do? Do that. What would a good teacher do? Do that. What would a good learner of Japanese language do? Do that. And if you fake it till you make it, then one day you realize you're actually not faking it anymore. You're just making it. Dave Moody.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on the age thing. Having been around the block a few more times than you sprightly chaps at the bottom of my screen. I haven't asked your age, Bob, so I think you're probably closer to me at 55.
I'm 59.
Are you 59? Well, you're looking good on it.
No.
Good
thank
looking
you.
59.
Yeah.
That's
If Bob
impossible.
had said he was 49, I don't think anyone would have questioned it.
No. Well, that was very impolite of me. That wasn't what I wanted to do. I just ask your age. I was just going to say that I think for me, the age thing has been a kind of a positive thing. It's a real wake up call. When I was writing the Hater and Autumn books, the original ones, I'd spend whole days pissing around, not doing what I should be doing, and wouldn't think anything of it. But now the pressure feels like it's really on. I've been planning to write one particular series, and I've been talking about it for literally a decade or so now, and I will write it. But I'm conscious now that if I do one book a year and it's a 5-book series, that takes me into my 60s, and it's a real kick up the backside. And I've talked quite a bit about this ideas list that I maintain as well, which has got so many hundred ideas on it. And I worked it out that if I go at my usual rate, it would take me 2 centuries to write everything that's on there. So I do find it a bit of a stimulant getting on in age, because it helps me to know that there isn't that much. I was going to say there isn't that long left. Hopefully there is a while left, but it helps me to know that I'm up against the clock now. And the other thing as well, this is completely unconnected, but sitting on my desk here, my wife and I have just redone our wills, and I've included my literary estate in my will, which sounds very fancy. And I say to the kids, when you get it, it's either going to be worth a lot or about 10 pence. But it gives me a kind of, it's a stimulant, because I think, well, okay, what I'm doing now every day is going to make a difference to what my kids have after I've gone. And so I think it's not, I just wanted to say it's not all doom and gloom. I think when you're on the other side of middle age, I think it can have its moments as well. Also, you're a wise old owl by now, so you could tell the kids.
It is a powerful kick up the arse, like going back to it, like you say about kind of mucking about. I wasn't doing anywhere near as much writing as I should have when I was, a childless man. Like come 2016, I can remember, where I was. Like in our old house, you'd kind of step down to the kitchen, And I can remember sitting there waiting for a bottle to warm up while my daughter was screaming upstairs, like, probably 2 weeks old, if that. And I remember sitting thinking, you've not got any time left to be pissing about and doing nothing. Like, if you're going to make something happen, you've got to make it happen now. And that compaction of time made a huge difference to my writing. It made a huge, huge difference. And it made me start to squeeze the words out of every hour that I had, every minute that I had. And, it's without that, I would be nowhere near as productive as I am now. 10 years on, I've written 15 books. Prior to that, in 25 years, I've written, more than 25 years, I've written no books. So, it's amazing what that kind of stimulation, that kind of, not quite pressure either, is it? Because it's a situation you're privileged to be in, to grow old and to have a family, and all those different situations that we find ourselves in. That they're all privileges in their own way, but it's a writer's duty to bring what they can in terms of the output and the quality from those situations. And I think, looking around the virtual room, I think we've all done that in one way or another, be it our own situations. We've all made the best of them and turned them into work. And I think, that's the making of a writer in many ways. It's how you turn your hand to the time and the resources and the knowledge and the insight that you've got, be it an outsider looking in on another culture like Michael is, or, somebody whose time is suddenly squeezed by a newborn child, or, whatever it may be. It is what we make of it. And I think, like I say, that's how you cut your teeth as a writer, really, more than anything.
I think that the thing that I felt as I've gotten older is that there's this part of me that feels like I need to put out something of substantial quality for a legacy, and not that I haven't, not that I haven't. It's just that when you do feel a little bit of doubt, it's like, what have you done? And it's like, when are you going to write, what they might call the great American novel or something like that, and something that's like, man, I need something that would really, really make me feel, successful, that have some substance, going to be serious. Then you flip through, industry news and stuff like that, and you realize that one of the most profitable movie franchises ever, The Evil Dead, doesn't even make sense on fucking paper. That it falls apart as soon as you start to write down what its possible rules are. And they've made millions off of that. And I'm like, I can do that shit too. So I'm just going to have a good fucking time. That's the way I see it.
Yeah.
I think that's, why have all that pressure for a legacy when I can have a lot of fun?
Yeah.
100%.
I think anytime we try to chase a trend or we try to manufacture a book because we think it will be commercially successful, then it just goes to shit. We have to write authentically. We have to write what it is that we believe in. That is the key word, having belief in your work. And also, when we look at the books or the movies that really tapped into something or really exploded, they were the outliers. They weren't the ones that jumped on a trend or easily fit into the genre box. That if you look at, you mentioned Harry Potter before. It was Harry Potter that became big. It wasn't the ones that jumped on that trend like Barry Trotter, which was a parody of Harry Trotter, or the other Boy Wizard books. So if you're trying to parrot something that's popular, that trend has already gone. It was the thing that was popular. It's not your book. So, that's why, Dave has put something out like Kemberton, which, it's I was going to say what subgenre it's a take on, but the beauty is that comes so late that it's almost a spoiler to say it. It's like nothing you have read before. Daddy's Boy could never have been written by AI. I think that's a good rule, actually. Could your story have been written by AI? If yes, okay, come up with a different one. If you look at both of Dan's recent novels, Last Night of Freedom and Lionhearts, they're not jumping on a trend. They're doing something very different. And with Last Night of Freedom, I mean, God damn it, I could see that becoming a film. It's so cinematic. It's playing with different subgenres, but it's wrapped it in a wholly original delivery system. It's very British in its way. It's very folk horror. It's got trappings of the slasher to a point. So we have to do something original. That's kind of the way that we have to do it. Otherwise, we not only are we going to fail, but we're gonna hate the process. So there's no point. If you're just doing it to make money, I've said it many, many times, do something else. Work in finance, work in the legal sector. It's gonna be more of a guarantee for money, and you might hate yourself less, or at least you might hate yourself equally, but you've got the guarantee of getting money, which you don't have with writing. And that's brought the room to
only because it's true. Because ultimately it is the most stupid profession if you want to make money. There's that great quote, isn't there? It's like, I can't remember who said it, but writing a book is like spending 2 years writing a joke and waiting to see if it's funny.
Yeah.
It's something like that. It's just it is ridiculous, and the amount of effort that you have to put in to produce something which people will then balk at paying £2 or £3 for. It's a nonsensical job, but I think it goes back to what we've all said in this conversation. You have to do it, and it's the love of doing it that keeps us doing it. And if we make money from it as well, then that's great.
Yeah, but this is why I've had this mini life crisis turning 40, because I know that I have bet so much on my writing. I have deliberately took jobs that would facilitate my writing. I have declined social events to facilitate my writing. It's like I've bet my life, I've bet my relationships, I've bet my work, I've bet potentially finance on making a success of writing. And the more time goes on, the more it's like, is this bet going to pay off? Now, I'm optimistic, but I'm also somebody who doesn't just wait around. So I seek out opportunities. I try to maximize my chances of success. And despite having this fear, this mini crisis, I do also feel the most optimistic this year, given the things that are happening, that actually this bet might finally pay off. But there's another part of me that's like, can we just speed it along? Can we just have the fucking payoff now? This is Horror has been going since 2010, originally as Read Horror. I've been writing with some seriousness, as I said, for a decade now. Books out since 2020. And the first one, The Girl in the Video, which we're here to talk about, the reissue, that is the most successful. So each book after has not quite been as successful, which sometimes could be a little bit depressing, but at the same time, I think, well, when I'm being optimistic, it can be humbling. It's like, yeah, you've got the struggle. If every fucking book does well and you have no struggle, then maybe I could get a bit egotistical. Maybe I could get a bit arrogant. But it's like, okay, so we've now released 4. Can we go back to the sales picking up? Can we have something good happen now?
But we've talked about that in the past, Michael. It's the struggle that keeps us going. You know, there are writers out there, and God love them, who have released that first book that has done fantastically, and the second book that's sold even more, and the third. And, you know, these are writers who haven't been through the slush pile or through the rejections and through the heartache that comes with it. And worse than the rejections, the fucking waiting. Oh my God. Like, that's the worst bit. Having irons in the fire is one thing, but resisting the temptation to constantly pull them out and check them if they're hot yet. Like, that's the true skill to being a writer. And there are people who haven't gone through that, you know, and fair play to them, because, you know, to take that elevator straight to the top must be an amazing feeling. But, you know, a lot of it is the journey, and the journey is what most of us have. And part of it is making it a journey that you're proud of and a journey that you enjoy. And maybe the destination isn't exactly where you want to be, but as long as you've spent your time putting the legwork in and enjoying the process, then I guess you've won no matter where you end up, I suppose. So yeah, we just got to keep pushing through. And, you know, from my point of view, yeah, the girl in the video is a very strong entry into your canon, but it's up there with all of the others as far as I'm concerned. And, you know, let's hope this film gets made. Let's hope, you know, everything that you've kind of talked about with it in the afterword, and, you know, and all those kind of things comes to fruition, because, you know, the legwork is there. And the one thing we can't legislate for as writers is the luck, you know, the kind of the chance that somebody else takes on our work. And as long as you keep putting it out there, I've got faith that it's going to happen. So yeah, here's to many more, I would say, on that front.
Yeah, well, I've certainly got another 2 tickets to success, as I like to view these books as, because there's another 2 books that are near to being ready to submit to places, and then I've got another one that will need a substantial edit, and then that can be fired out to places. So yeah, there's 3, so almost enough to double the releases. Well, I can throw a short story collection too. So agents and publishers, if you're listening to this, you get in touch, because I got the goods.
Okay, so based on the fact that, you know, you've reissued your most successful book, Michael, and, you know, there's hugely optimistic film news in the works, what message would you like to leave us on as writers and people in terms of our craft and the way that we continue to improve? What's the one lesson that, starting out with the girl in the video 10 years ago and looking back at it now at its peak, as hopefully it's about to tip you over the edge to horror superstardom, what have you learned, and what would you like to pass on to your listeners at this point in your writing journey?
I mean, despite talking about originality, I don't think any of this will be original advice, but the writing game is one of perseverance. So you just have to keep writing. If you can make a routine of it, then that's great. If you find that your life and your schedule makes it difficult to have a concrete routine, that's okay too. You know, don't be hard on yourself. Write as much as you can when you can. But if as much as you can isn't that much, that's okay. Just be completely at peace with your circumstances and your situation, because this life is ever changing anyway. So even if it's difficult now to write regularly, at another point, it will be easier. There will be other opportunities. You know, we spoke about not self-rejecting, but don't put barriers up. Maybe it is easier for you to write on your computer, as it is with me. But That doesn't mean that you can't write a little bit or plan a little bit or do something useful, maybe when you're on public transport on your phone. You can be thinking of ideas, you can be jotting things down. So there may be obstacles and you may have to get around them, but don't let them paralyze you. Don't let them stop you from writing and from creating. You can be creating in most circumstances. So you do what you can, you do it as regularly as you can. And like I said before, don't wait for opportunity. Don't hope that one day opportunity will come knocking. You have to come knocking. Submit your work to publishers. Get in contact with agents, with podcasts. Remember that story is first. Don't let other things like money or commercial constraints come into it. Don't tell yourself you can't do it. Even if you're scared, write anyway. It's okay to be scared. It is normal to be scared. If you are feeling something about the story is off, then you are probably right, but that's okay. You can adjust, you can look at it. Even though I am a perfectionist, particularly in the first draft, don't let perfection be the enemy of done. You can write the first draft, you can fix it later. So keep going, keep believing in yourself. If you want to write, you don't need permission from anyone else. That's it. As I say at the end of This Is Horror, keep on writing. Sometimes it's as simple as that.